In the brutal Nevada training facility, one soldier moved through the evaluation like a shadow no one wanted to see. Claire Voss failed rifle qualification on purpose. Shots wide! Reloads fumbled. In the kill house, she hesitated at every threshold. When the flashbang simulator detonated, she froze completely, lost in the voice of a man who had died beside her 9 months earlier. They called her wallpaper. They positioned her for failure and forged reports to make her dismissal permanent. But at 0400 on the locked range, her hands moved with lethal precision. Magazine changes, malfunction clearances, target transitions, all executed in perfect silence, while the Master Chief watched from the shadows and understood she was choosing to fail. Then the rope bridge failed. A soldier pitched over the edge. She caught him with one trained hand, locked the grip, and held 170 pounds steady for 11 long seconds while the entire yard fell silent. In the final evaluation, she stopped pretending. She tore through the last building in 9 minutes and 44 seconds, shattering the old course record. The men who had mocked her finally understood. The still water had begun to move. The hands were the first thing, not her face, not her rank, not the quiet way she moved through a room like she'd already mapped every exit before she crossed the threshold, just her hands still, loose at her sides. Not the stillness of someone at rest, the stillness of something coiled. Years of training a body not to reach for what wasn't there anymore, not to flinch, not to telegraph, not to give the room any information it hadn't specifically requested. Staff Sergeant Claire Voss stepped off the transport van at 0630 on a Tuesday in October. Fort Deseret Combat Training Facility, Nevada, the kind of desert that didn't apologize for what it was. Flat, brutal, honest in the way only empty places can be. No trees to hide behind, no elevation to misread, just distance and light, and the particular cruelty of a sky that went on longer than it had any reason to. She was 27 years old. She looked older. Not in her face. Her face was fine, unremarkable in the specific way the military trains people to be unremarkable. Brown ash hair pulled back tight, eyes the color of a storm system moving in from the coast, the green-gray of deep water before weather. Medium height. Nothing about her that would make you look twice, except the stillness, and the fact that when the van braked hard and every other soldier grabbed instinctively for something to hold, she didn't move. At all, like turbulence was just weather, like the ground had never been something she needed to negotiate with. The admin building was 10 degrees cooler than the yard. Fluorescent lights, the smell of old paperwork and industrial cleaner, and the specific bureaucratic staleness of a place that processed people in volume. The admin sergeant slid a keycard across the desk without looking up. Second floor. Room 208. Don't be late for briefings. These instructors don't care what you did before you got here. Claire picked up the card, looked at the number, put it in her left breast pocket. Not her right, not her pants. Her left breast pocket specifically, the one closest to center, the one whose contents she could access with either hand, and walked toward the barracks. The admin sergeant watched her go, then went back to his paperwork. Some people just didn't leave an impression. That was fine. That was, in fact, entirely the point. The barracks smelled like every barracks she'd ever slept in. Industrial cleaner, boot leather, particular stalenesses of air that had been breathed by too many people who were too tired to notice it anymore. She walked past the rows of bunks near the entrance, near the noise, near the social center of any shared space, and kept walking. Corner, wall on 2 sides. She didn't think about why. She never thought about why anymore. The body had its preferences, and they were sensible preferences, and thinking about them was a waste of time she could use for other things. Her duffel went under the bed. Her rifle case went beside it, not on top. Her boots came off at a specific angle. Her gear arranged itself in a specific order that had nothing to do with the diagram posted on the bulletin board, and everything to do with years of learning to find things in the dark, fast, in rooms where fast was the only speed that mattered. She sat on the edge of the mattress, looked at her hands, steady. Both of them. Good. She held that recognition for exactly 3 seconds, not savoring it, just confirming it, the way you confirm a compass reading before you move. Then stood up and went to find the mess hall. Because the first meal in a new place was information. And information was always worth the walk. Dinner was loud. The kind of loud that happens when you put 30 competitive people in a room together and tell them, implicitly, that they're being evaluated on everything including this. Everyone performing. Everyone watching. Everyone making rapid decisions about who mattered and who didn't, and what those decisions said about their own judgment. Claire got her tray, moved to a table near the windows, sat with her back to the wall, left breast pocket accessible, clear sight line to both exits, 2 tables of buffer between herself and the loudest cluster of personalities in the room. 3 tables over, a group of 4 had already established themselves. Lieutenant Garrett Finch was the kind of man who took up space deliberately. Broad-shouldered, a jaw like something from a recruiting poster, voice calibrated to carry, not too loud, just loud enough, the exact volume of someone who had learned early that being heard was the first step to being obeyed. He sat at the center of the table because of course he did. He would always sit at the center, in every room. For the rest of his life, probably, unless something significant interrupted that habit. On his left, Sergeant Marco Tully, large, easy grin. The physical confidence of someone who had never encountered a doorframe he couldn't fill and had made a philosophy out of it. On his right, Sergeant Dex Waring, lean, still. The kind of still that was different from Claire's kind of still. Hers was trained discipline. His was calculation. He watched the room the way a chess player watches the board. Not looking for beauty, looking for leverage. At the end, Private Callum Briggs. Younger than the others by visible margins. Positioned slightly apart, the way satellites are apart from what they orbit. Close enough to belong, far enough to survive a miscalculation. Class Bravo 9, Finch was saying with the ease of a man conducting a tour of territory he'd already claimed. Let's talk about who's going to be gone by day 5, Tully grinned. Waring's eyes moved through the room, methodical, unhurried. They stopped on Claire for exactly half a second. Wallpaper, he said. Finch followed the look. Took in Claire's corner table, her tray, her unremarkable presence. Wallpaper, he agreed. Picked up his fork. Briggs looked at his food. Claire heard every word. She ate her meal in a specific sequence. Protein, then carbohydrate, then vegetables, always the same order. A small controllable thing in an environment full of variables. And did not look up. Did not react. Filed the faces, the voices, the social architecture of the table. The gap between Briggs and the others that spoke of someone not quite as committed to belonging as he appeared. Wallpaper. Fine. She'd been called worse. By people in rooms where the walls didn't have names and the windows didn't face anything you'd want to look at. Wallpaper was fine. Wallpaper was, for the next 14 days, actually perfect. She finished her meal, returned her tray, walked back to her bunk without speaking to anyone. In the corridor outside the mess hall, she stopped, just for a second. Put her hand flat against the cinder block wall. Cool. Solid. Indifferent. 14 more days, she told herself. Then she went to bed. The rifle qualification range stretched out under a Nevada sky that had decided, on this particular Wednesday, to be aggressively beautiful. Too blue. The kind of blue that almost hurt. 200 meters. Standard silhouettes wavering in the desert heat. Should have been the easiest part of the evaluation. Baseline marksmanship. The thing every soldier in this program had done hundreds of times. The thing that was supposed to be automatic by now. Should have been. Claire chambered her first round. Found her stance. Settled her sight picture. Everything textbook. Everything correct from the outside. She pulled the trigger. Wide right. 3 inches the instructor exhaled behind her. That specific exhale. Not quite a sigh, not quite a sound. Just the audible version of something being written on a clipboard. Her second round went wide left. Overcorrection. Classic error. The kind a nervous recruit makes when they're trying too hard to fix the last mistake. The reload, which should have been automatic, which had been automatic for the better part of 6 years, which she could perform in the dark, under pressure, while making simultaneous decisions about 3 other things, fumbled. The magazine angled wrong. Her thumb didn't catch the release cleanly. 4 seconds of visible struggle that felt, to the people watching, like incompetence, to Claire. It felt like holding her breath underwater. Voss. The instructor didn't bother hiding his disappointment. "You need to do better than that." Behind her, Finch's voice came easy and unhurried. "Audience ready. Wonder what unit she came from." "Must have been a quiet posting," Tully laughed. The kind of laugh that was mostly air and mostly performance. Claire kept her eyes downrange, counted to 3. Took a breath that was slower than it needed to be. Set up for the next string. "It's fine," she told herself. Controlled. "You're doing exactly what you're supposed to do." Except the part of her that had spent 3 years operating in places that didn't have names on maps. That part kept noticing things it was not supposed to use. The angle of shadow from the observation tower, the distance to the perimeter fence, the instructor's patrol pattern 12 feet back, tracking left. The wind reading, 3 knots, coming from the northwest, affecting rounds at this range by approximately 2 inches at 200 meters. She noticed all of it, made herself use none of it. The second string was also bad. Technically, documentably, clipboardably bad. Not catastrophically. Not the failure of someone who'd never fired a rifle. Just the failure of someone who couldn't reliably hit what they were aiming at, which was, in this context, a different kind of problem. When time was called, her target looked like someone in the early stages of learning. Not someone who'd been doing this, professionally, since she was 21. Finch made sure of his post-exercise commentary reached the right people. "Some qualification records," he said to Tully. "Just loud enough. Just don't transfer." Whatever she was doing before, it wasn't this. Wearing added nothing. He just watched Claire walk past. The watching had a quality to it that she clocked and filed and placed in the category of things to monitor. She went to clean her rifle because the rifle was real. The cleaning was real. And some days, real was what you held on to. Master Chief Buck Harlan watched from the instructor's platform and said nothing, 50 years old. Big hands that had learned patience the way hands do. Slowly, through repetition, through the accumulated understanding that rushing things rarely improved them. A face that had seen enough weather to have stopped being surprised by it. 25 years in the military, most of it in places where the work was serious and the paperwork was minimal. And what mattered was whether the person next to you actually knew what they were doing. He watched Claire Voss fumble a reload. And something snagged, not dramatically. Just a small interior catch, like a thread on a rough edge. Because he'd watched 1,000 fumbled reloads in his career, and they had a quality, a specific quality of genuine struggle, of muscle memory failing under pressure, of a body not yet understanding what it was being asked to do. This didn't have that quality. This fumble was too consistent, too specific. The same angle, the same hesitation, the same moment of apparent confusion at the same point in the sequence. Not random error. Not training gap per thought. He wrote her name on his clipboard, underlined it once, then went back to watching the line. After the class went to chow, Harlan sat at the terminal in the instructor's office. Standard procedure. He pulled records on every incoming soldier in the first 48 hours. Knowing his people meant knowing their history, where they'd been, what they'd seen, what kind of pressure had already been applied to them before they walked through his gate. He typed Claire Voss's name. The system loaded, processed, generated a response, Dax denied. Authority level insufficient. He stared at that, typed his override code. The one that had worked, without exception, through 3 combat deployments and 6 different postings and every classified program he'd ever had reason to access. In 25 years of service, Dax denied. Authority level insufficient. Harlan leaned back in his chair and looked at the screen. In 25 years, he had pulled records on special operations soldiers, on personnel assigned to programs that technically didn't appear in public documentation, on individuals whose postings were listed as administrative notations rather than actual locations. He had security clearances that most people in this building would never know existed. He had a contact list that included people you couldn't reach through official channels. He had never, not once, been denied access to a trainee's file with a message that calmly informed him his authority level was insufficient. He typed her name a 3rd time, Naski Dennett, authority level insufficient. The screen waited, patient and blank. Harlan turned it off, got up, put on his jacket, walked out into the October night, stood in the desert dark, thought about a fumbled reload that wasn't a fumbled reload, about a file that didn't exist at his clearance level, about a woman who sat with her back to every wall, whose gear was arranged in a pattern he recognized from people who'd learned organization in environments where disorganization had immediate and irreversible consequences. He went back inside, did not sleep well, started watching Claire Voss differently. The urban combat course lived in shipping containers and plywood, a maze of corridors and rooms designed to replicate the geometry of real buildings, the offset doorways, the fatal funnels, the corners that hid threats until you were already committed to your angle. It smelled like sawdust and simulated gunpowder and something vaguely chemical that stuck to the back of your throat. The noise inside was controlled chaos, shouts, training rounds, the particular acoustics of small spaces under pressure. Claire stacked outside the first door, back straight, weapon up, breathing controlled, everything correct. The go signal came. She moved, too slow. She was half a beat slow at the threshold, and the paper target inside completed its mechanical threat cycle before she could engage. Red buzzer, red light. The flat sound of failure in a small space. Voss. That hesitation cost lives. She pushed through the next door, faster, angles wrong. Muzzle tracking too high on the first sweep, compensating too low on the second. The geometry of the room was there in her head, fully formed, accurate. She could see exactly where to be and why, but she was not letting herself act on it. Because acting on it would mean moving like someone who understood rooms in the way that only comes from having cleared real ones, under conditions where the targets weren't made of paper. Finch was in the same run. He cleared his rooms fast. Not perfectly. There were gaps in his angles, a corner left unchecked that would have produced a casualty in any real environment. But fast, and loud and confident in a way that registered well on clipboards even when it shouldn't. In the staging area afterward, he made sure his assessment of the run carried. Some people got it, he said to Waring. Some people never had it. Support functions exist for a reason, Waring said, with the even tone of someone being reasonable. Not everyone is built for the sharp end. Tully cracked his knuckles. Briggs looked somewhere else. Claire field stripped her weapon, started cleaning it, piece by piece. Same sequence, same pressure, same order. Because there was something stabilizing about a process that didn't require decisions. About a task you could perform correctly without negotiating with yourself. About how correctly. She did not look at Finch. She did not look at Waring. 10 more days, she thought, and kept cleaning. The obstacle course was on Thursday, and it should have been the safe part. No weapons decisions. No tactical angles. Just a body moving through a physical environment. Wall, rope bridge, wire crawl, tire run. The kind of thing that rewarded fitness and determination and didn't require her to carefully miscalibrate anything. She could just run it. Be a person running a course. That was allowed. She cleared the first wall clean. Good movement, efficient, no wasted motion. The rope bridge, sure footing, good pace. Low crawl under the wire, gear clear, no snagging. The ground-level precision of a body that knew how to stay flat. She was, for about 40 seconds, just a soldier running a course. And she was good at it. She could feel it. That particular physical confidence of a body doing what it was designed to do, moving through space with the quiet pleasure of competence. She'd missed that, more than she'd let herself acknowledge. And then the flashbang simulator detonated 6 feet to her left. That specific crack, that specific white that burned through closed eyelids and made the world go flat for half a second. She stopped. Not a tactical pause. Not a moment of reassessment. She stopped the way a machine stops when you cut the power. Complete. Immediate. Everything offline at once. And she was not in Nevada. She was in a place that didn't appear on any map that anyone at this facility would ever be cleared to read. A place that was dark and close and smelled like concrete dust and something she didn't have a word for anymore. The smell of a situation that had gone wrong in a way that was not going to be correctable. And there was a voice, male, young, the vowels of someone who'd grown up in rural Georgia and still carried them even after years away. The voice of a person saying her name in the specific register of someone who isn't certain they'll get to finish the sentence. Claire. Corporal Jesse Marin, 24 years old when he died. Freckles across his nose that he'd been mildly annoyed by his entire adult life. An enthusiasm for star identification that had survived multiple deployments and never become ironic. Allergic to something they'd never managed to identify because they were in the field too consistently to run proper allergy panels. He'd been dead for 9 months, and she could reconstruct, from sensory memory alone, exactly what his voice sounded like in the 30 seconds before it stopped. Voss, the instructor's voice. Nevada, October, training course. Simulated Voss. Move. She blinked, oriented, pushed forward, finished the course. Badly. Timing destroyed. The freeze already in the record. Already being added to the accumulating documentation of everything wrong with Staff Sergeant Claire Voss. In the staging area, Finch didn't lower his voice. That was a training flashbang, he said. A training device. Shell shock, Waring said, with the casual authority of someone who'd read a chapter summary, seen it before. Usually means they're done. Can't trust someone like that in a real situation, Tully said. Never know when they're going to stop. Briggs looked at his boots. His jaw was tight in a way that might have been discomfort. Or disagreement. It was hard to tell yet. Finch summed it up the way he summed everything up. Clean. Final. Requiring no discussion. She's broken. Someone should say it before she hurts someone else. From the far end of the staging area, Claire cleaned her gear. Piece by piece. Methodical. Same sequence. Her jaw was tight. She noticed it. Consciously relaxed it. Once because letting it stay tight was information. And she wasn't giving this room any information it hadn't specifically requested. She finished. Packed her kit. Walked back to the barracks. She did not run. Running would have meant they'd gotten to her. She kept telling herself that. Harlan couldn't sleep. This happened more now than it used to. His back. The accumulated debt of years spent carrying things in conditions that hadn't been designed with ergonomics in mind. And the other kind of not sleeping. The brain's habit, developed somewhere in his 40s, of choosing the quiet hours to review everything he should have done differently over the past 3 decades. He got up at 0350, put on his jacket, walked toward the instructor's office to retrieve something from his desk. The training yard was dark and still. Cold in the way Nevada gets cold at that hour. Not the cold of weather, but the cold of a landscape, releasing the day's heat all at once, efficiently, without sentiment. He rounded the corner of the equipment shed and stopped. Claire Voss was on the rifle range. The range was closed, locked at 2100. She'd either gotten through the gate during open hours and stayed, or she'd gotten through it some other way. And he found, to his own mild surprise, that he didn't particularly want to know which. She had her weapon. She was running drills. Harlan stepped back into the shadow of the equipment shed, not to hide. If she'd been the kind of person who needed to be surprised to be observed, she'd have heard him already. He stepped back because he understood, in the bone-level way of long experience, that whatever this was, it was not for him to interrupt. She ran magazine changes, 3 positions, standing, kneeling, prone, each one with the kind of precision that spoke of years, not weeks, not months, years of this exact practice, in this exact sequence, until the sequence had become something below conscious thought. Her hands moved the way water moves when it knows exactly where it's going. No excess, no hesitation, no gap between the decision and the execution. She ran malfunction clearances. Tap, rack, reassess, over and over. The same 3 movements, the same timing, the same outcome. Her hands had a fluency that contradicted everything she'd shown on the qualifications, range with a completeness that was almost jarring. Like watching someone stumble through a piano lesson, and then, in private, play the concerto from memory. She ran target transitions, left to right to left, high to low, near to far. Her muzzle tracked geometries that had nothing to do with the fixed silhouettes on this range. Geometries of real rooms, real corridors, real doorways, the spatial logic of environments that were not designed to be safe. She ran all of it for 12 minutes, and then she stopped, just stopped. Weapon at her side, head slightly down. Breathing, not hard, just present. The breath of someone who has been working and is now resting and knows the difference. She looked at her hands. Both of them. in the ambient light from the perimeter lamps, just barely visible. She looked at them the way you look at something you're checking on. Confirming. A quiet internal question receiving a quiet internal answer. Then she heard him. He'd shifted weight, a small sound. Barely anything, but she turned immediately, directly toward the shadow where he was standing. No hesitation, no searching. She found him the first time. He stepped forward into the light. They looked at each other. Across 12 feet of dark training ground, Harlan had been in enough serious places, with enough serious people, to know that some moments required nothing. No question, no command, no filling of silence, with words that would only reduce what was in the silence. This was one of those moments. Claire looked at him for 3 seconds. Exactly 3. He counted without meaning to. Then she looked back at the range. Then she collected her kit, cleared her weapon with the same automatic precision, walked past him toward the barracks. She didn't speak. She didn't explain. She didn't run. Harlan stood in the dark, long after the sound of her footsteps had faded, thinking about 12 minutes of precision that had no business existing in the body of someone who couldn't reliably hit a static target at 200 meters. Thinking about the way she'd found him in the dark, without searching. Thinking about a word that kept surfacing in his mind and wouldn't go back down. Tusing. Not unable. Not broken. Not struggling tusing. He went back inside, sat at his desk, looked at nothing in particular for a while, then picked up the phone. Called a number he hadn't called in 2 years. An old contact at JSOC. Someone who owed him something he'd never collected on, and who knew things that didn't appear in any system Harlan had access to. The phone rang 4 times before it picked up. No greeting. "Just Buck, I have a name," Harlan said. "Claire Voss, Staff Sergeant. I can't pull her file." Silence. The particular silence of someone deciding how much to say. "That name connects to a program," the contact said finally. "A program that doesn't," he stopped, restarted. Chose his words with the care of someone selecting what to put down and what to leave behind. "Stop there. That's all I can give you." "That's enough," Harlan said. "It's not." "But it's all you're getting." The line went quiet. Harlan put the phone down, sat with what he had. A program that doesn't exist on paper, doesn't operate within standard evaluation frameworks, doesn't produce files that a senior NCO with significant clearance can pull on a Tuesday night. He thought about 12 minutes on a closed range, about a fumble that was too consistent to be a fumble. About the way she moved through the barracks with the situational awareness of someone who had learned, in real places, that the wrong bunk could get you killed. He thought about what kind of program trained a person to move like that, and what kind of protocol would require that person to hide it, and why that person would be in his program, under his evaluation, on a trajectory toward a dismissal recommendation he was being asked to sign. He opened his bottom drawer, put his hand on the dismissal paperwork he'd been asked to prepare, left it there, didn't sign it, didn't file it, closed the drawer, and decided that whatever was happening with Staff Sergeant Claire Voss, it was not finished yet. Friday arrived the way Fridays do in evaluation programs, with the accumulated weight of everything that had happened since Monday, and the particular pressure of knowing that someone, somewhere, was drawing conclusions. The team tactics exercise was the week's final assessment. Squad assignments posted Thursday night. Harlan watched Finch read the roster, and watched the expression that crossed his face when he saw Claire Voss's name next to his. It wasn't dread. It was something more specific, more deliberate opportunity. That was the word for it, the multi-building exercise. Simulated hostile structure, mixed role players, 30-minute window, points for speed and accuracy, deductions for casualties and civilian contact. The kind of assessment that exposed who could lead, who could follow, and who was costing the group more than they were contributing. Finch took point immediately. Loud commands, aggressive positioning. The body language of a man who had been told consistently that he was the most capable person in any room, and had organized his identity around the maintenance of that belief. Claire was assigned rear security. She took it without argument, because arguing would have been information. From the rear, she did something that Harlan, watching from the evaluation position, noticed but couldn't immediately explain. She tracked angles that had already been cleared. Not obsessively, not in a way that looked like paranoia or confusion. With a rhythm. Like someone running a secondary check on a primary assessment. Like someone who didn't quite trust the first pass and had the habit, built in over years, of verifying. She was, he realized, simultaneously performing the role she'd been given and running the entire scenario in her head at a different level. 2 tracks. The visible one and the one underneath. The exercise went badly. Of course it went badly. Finch's entries were fast but imprecise. Tully moved loudly. Waring got impatient at a critical threshold. By the 3rd building, 2 simulated casualties and an instructor calling it over the radio. Squad 4. Done. In the debrief, Finch pointed at Claire. Hesitation in rear security cost us position in the 2nd building. The instructor wrote it down. Claire said nothing. What would she have said? That she'd tracked the entry failure before it happened? That she'd seen the correct solution to the problem before Finch had identified that there was one? That she'd been watching him commit errors she was being blamed for, from the rear slot he'd assigned her, in silence, because silence was what the protocol required. She said nothing. She cleaned her weapon, finished the debrief, walked out. Finch's crew ensured the post-exercise commentary reached the right ears. Dead weight, Tully said. At this point it's clinical. Some patterns don't change, Waring said, with the even voice of a man being fair. You see it and you know. Briggs said nothing. He was getting very good at saying nothing. But the quality of his nothing was shifting, becoming less comfortable, more deliberate. The silence of someone actively choosing not to speak, rather than someone who had nothing to say. Harlan noticed. He noticed most things, at this point. That was what happened when you stopped trusting the surface. The notification came down Friday afternoon, through the evaluation chain. Staff Sergeant Claire Voss, consistently failing to meet core performance standards across rifle qualification, close quarters combat, and unit integration exercises. Performance trend indicates negative trajectory. Evaluation board recommends administrative separation with medical referral. Effective end of week 2 pending final assessment. Harlan read it twice, put it on his desk, looked at the wall. The paperwork was procedurally accurate. Every documented failure was real. Every score was exactly what the record showed. There was not a single falsifiable element in the recommendation. Anyone who read it would find it entirely reasonable. That was the problem, because reasonable conclusions drawn from incomplete information were still wrong conclusions. Harlan had spent enough years in serious places to understand that the most dangerous assessments were the ones that were completely defensible on paper and completely wrong, in fact. He walked to Finch's quarters, knocked. Finch opened the door, already in his confident posture. The posture that didn't have an off-setting. Master Chief, your team assessment cited Voss specifically. Hesitation at the 2nd building, her position. I know what it said. Harlan kept his voice level. I'm asking you something else. Did you give her adequate time at the threshold? Something moved across Finch's face. Fast. There and gone. Standard go signal, he said. Harlan looked at him. Right. He left, stood in the corridor for a moment. Standard go signal. Which was a command, not a coordinated team entry. Which meant the timing gap wasn't Claire's hesitation. It was the absence of the entry coordination that should have preceded the signal. Which meant the documented failure had an undocumented cause. Which meant someone had set the conditions for failure and then documented the failure as character. He went back to his office, opened his bottom drawer, put the dismissal recommendation next to the document he'd refused to file, looked at both of them, thought, 1 week left. Whatever is happening here, there is 1 week left for it to become clear. He closed the drawer. That night, in room 208, corner bunk, back to the wall. Claire lay in the dark with her eyes open. The barracks had settled into its late-night sounds. The particular rhythm of 30 people in various stages of sleep. The creak of the building adjusting to the temperature drop. The distant movement of a vehicle somewhere on the perimeter. She looked at the ceiling, thought about Jesse Marin's voice eyes on the obstacle course. How it had come back so completely. Not a fragment, not an impression, but the full thing, his exact timbre. The precise quality of those last seconds. 9 months since the mission. 9 months of carrying it in the specific way. You carry things you can't put down and can't look at directly and can't explain to anyone who wasn't there. The psych officer who'd cleared her for this evaluation had used the words reintegration protocol in the careful tone of someone who understood the inadequacy of the phrase and used it anyway because the alternatives were worse. You'll be contained, he'd said, until you're not. The evaluation will assess whether the conditioning holds under sustained social pressure. She'd understood what he meant. She understood it more now. More specifically. More in her body than she had in that office. Because what he described as sustained social pressure was, in practice, being called wallpaper every day. Being positioned for failure in exercises by someone who understood exactly how to do it. Hearing yourself discussed as a cautionary tale. In a room you weren't supposed to be listening to. Watching a week of work produce a document recommending your removal, while the part of you that could have prevented every single failure sat behind 14 days of protocol, waiting. Was this worth it? She thought. Not the years before. Not the work. Not Jesse. That question had a different shape entirely and she wasn't ready for it yet. Just this specific thing. 14 days of deliberate smallness in a room full of people making confident, wrong assessments about what she was. She didn't have an answer, which was, itself, a new experience. She looked at her hands in the dark, steady. Both of them. The same hands that had run 12 minutes of clean drills at 0400 reel, while Harlan watched from the shadows and said nothing. The same hands that would, for 7 more days, fumble magazine changes in front of people who thought they were watching incompetence. 14 days, she told herself on day 1. 10 more, on Thursday. Now 7. She breathed in, let it out, looked at the narrow rectangle of window above her bunk, the Nevada sky visible in that small frame, the desert dark, the specific density of stars that only appears when you're far enough from anything that calls itself a city. She found Cassiopeia, there, where it always was. Where Jesse had pointed it out on 3 different nights in 3 different places, each time with the same uncomplicated enthusiasm of someone who hadn't decided yet to pretend that wonder was embarrassing. I know which one it is, Jesse. I know you know. I just like saying it. She lay still for a while. 7 more days, she told herself. And underneath that, quieter, not quite a thought yet, more like a change in the quality of the dark outside the window. Or maybe not 7. She didn't let herself examine that. Not yet. Some things had to be carried without being opened until the moment arrived that made opening them possible. She closed her eyes, breathed. Her hands were still. She kept them that way. The second week started on a Monday, which sounds obvious. Which sounds like something that doesn't need saying. But there's a difference between the beginning of a first week and the beginning of a second that anyone who has ever endured something difficult will recognize immediately. The first week is arrival, orientation. The body and mind still carrying the momentum of whatever came before, still comparing, still adjusting, still telling itself that the discomfort is temporary because everything is new and new things settle. The second week is when you understand that this is just what it is now, that the difficulty isn't a phase of adjustment. It's the actual terrain. And you're going to be standing in it for 7 more days. And the only question is what you're going to be made of by the time you come out this other side. Claire understood this at 0530 Monday morning when she woke already tired. Not physically tired. She was in excellent shape. She'd always been in excellent shape. The kind that came from years of needing her body to perform specific tasks under conditions that didn't care about her comfort or her readiness or anything, except whether the task got done. Her body was fine. She was tired in a different way. The way you get tired when you spend every waking hour performing a version of yourself that is substantially smaller than the actual version. When every calibrated instinct gets manually overridden. When every automatic response gets intercepted and replaced with something slower, something less. Something that fits the profile you're supposed to be presenting. It was exhausting in a way she hadn't fully anticipated sitting in the psych officer's office 3 weeks ago, nodding at words like containment and sustained pressure, as though those were clinical abstractions, rather than things that would happen to her body and her mind every hour of every day. She got up, made her bunk, tight corners, same sequence, left side then right, laced her boots, walked to the mess hall in the particular gray of early Nevada morning, when the desert hadn't decided yet what it was going to be, and the light was the color of something not quite committed to existing. She got her tray, sat near the window, back to the wall, the room filled around her. Finch arrived with Tully and Waring, the three of them moving with the ease of people who had already decided how the week was going to go. Briggs came in alone, 2 minutes behind, and sat at their table without being acknowledged. He picked up his fork, put it down, picked it up again. Claire noticed the gap between Briggs and the others, still there, maybe wider than last week. Hard to tell yet. She ate her meal in the correct sequence. Protein first, then carbohydrates, then vegetables. Small controllable thing in an environment full of variables. She was down to 7 days, and she was going to eat them in the right order. Finch's voice carried across the room, calibrated as always, to reach exactly the people he wanted it to reach. Week 2, he said. This is where people either find something or they don't. Waring, without looking up from his food. Some people already found their ceiling. Tully made a sound of agreement. Easy. Cheerful. Briggs said nothing. Claire finished her meal, returned her tray, walked back toward the training yard. 7 more days, she thought. And underneath that, quieter. The thing she hadn't let herself fully examine since Friday night, or maybe not 7. She kept walking. The Monday exercise was squad tactics in the kill house. New scenario configuration, tighter quarters, more role players, the kind of layout that rewarded spatial awareness and precise decision-making, and punished hesitation with consequences that were immediate and visible to everyone watching. Finch put Claire at position 3 in the stack, not the rear. 3. Which meant she'd be second through the door, clearing the angles that the point man left, setting the conditions for the person behind her, a position that required immediate and precise action, because the person at 4 was moving on her signal, not on their own read of the room. She thought in the second before they moved, why position 3? Then she thought, because at 3, my failure is visible to the entire formation. Because if I freeze at position 3, I don't just fail, I create a cascade. Because Garrett Finch understands, whether he's conscious of it or not, exactly how to state someone's failure for maximum documentation. She filed that. Took her position. The go signal came. They moved first room. She was deliberate at the threshold. Controlled. She cleared 70% of her assigned angles. The 70 that corresponded to her designated sector. The 70 that a soldier in her position would be expected to cover. The other 30% she left alone, because the other 30% was what she could see from that position, without doing something that looked like she'd spent 3 years clearing rooms in places where getting the geometry wrong had consequences that went well beyond a red buzzer. The buzzer didn't sound. No casualties recorded on room 1. Behind her, she heard Finch exhale. Not relief. Something more complicated than relief. Second room. Offset doorway. The kind of entry that required a decision at the threshold. Strong side or weak side. And why. And the decision had to be made in the quarter second, before momentum committed you to a direction. She could see the answer from 12 feet out. The angle of the door, the light through the gap, the shadow pattern on the floor, that told her exactly where the role player was standing. She chose weak side, slowed herself down to choose it at the speed of someone working through a problem, rather than someone who'd solved it before the question was fully asked. It cost her half a second. Voss. Instructor voice. Flat. What was the hesitation? Threshold decision. Sergeant, make it faster. Finch, behind her. Some hesitations are a pattern, not a one-time thing. Waring quieter to Tully. Personality trait at this point. Claire moved to the next room. Keep going, she told herself. Just keep 7 days. 7 days of just keep going. She'd done harder things for longer. She was absolutely certain of that, and only moderately certain it was helping. Building 3 was a 2-story structure at the far end of the urban assault course. The second floor connected to an adjacent platform via a rope bridge. Standard field construction. Rated load capacity. Safety harness required. Instructor verification before any soldier crossed. The kind of equipment that existed on training facilities across the country. Inspected regularly. Trusted routinely. So thoroughly integrated into the exercise that it had stopped being a thing anyone thought about specifically. The inspection cycle had slipped 2 days due to a scheduling conflict. That was all. Just 2 days. Sometimes the distance between when something should happen and when it actually happens is exactly wide enough for things to go wrong. Briggs was on the bridge first. He'd clipped his harness correctly. The instructor had checked it. The clip itself was the problem. A hairline fracture in the carabiner body, invisible to visual inspection, the kind of structural failure that develops under repeated load cycles and announces itself only when it's too late for the announcement to be useful. He stepped onto the bridge. 6 feet above the platform floor. 4 steps out. The clip gave. Not all at once. A sound first. A high, sharp crack that cut through the ambient noise of the exercise like a word spoken at the wrong moment in a quiet room. Then the right side of Briggs's harness releasing. His body pivoting outward as the support failed. His hands grabbing for the rope rail, but finding it wrong. Angle wrong. Grip wrong. The body's panic response overriding the trained response in the way it sometimes does, when the trained response hasn't had quite long enough to become the only response. He was going over. Claire was 4 feet behind him on the platform. Here is the thing about years of training in places where the distance between intervention and catastrophe is measured in fractions of a second. You stop processing the gap between perceiving a problem and responding to it. The gap closes. Eventually, for some people, in some situations, it closes completely. Her hand shot out, caught his left wrist. The grip she used was specific. Thumb over the radial pulse point, 4 fingers wrapped past the joint. Hold you use when you need to bear someone's weight for an unknown duration, and you cannot afford mechanical failure. It was not a reaching grab. It was a precise, deliberate, load-bearing grip that she had practiced, in other contexts, for other reasons, until it was below conscious thought. She held him 172 pounds. She held him with one arm, her other hand locked on the rope rail, her feet finding purchase on the bridge slats, with the automatic precision of a body that knew how to brace against force before the mind had finished calculating the geometry. 11 seconds. 11 seconds before the instructor reached them, before trained hands took over, before Briggs was pulled back to solid platform and checked and confirmed safe. She passed his wrist to the instructor, stepped back, let the process work the way it was supposed to. And then she looked up. The training yard had gone quiet. Not silent. There was still ambient noise, still the distant sounds of other exercises, still the mechanical background of a functioning facility. But in the immediate vicinity of Building 3, quiet. The particular quiet of people who have witnessed something unexpected and are still processing what category to put it in. Finch was staring at her. Tully was staring at her. Waring was staring at her. And his expression was different from the others. Not surprise exactly, but something more considered, more internal. The expression of someone who has just received a piece of information and is already deciding what to do with it. Because what they'd just seen was not the movement of someone with Claire Voss's performance record, was not the reflex of someone who fumbled magazine changes and froze at flashbangs. It was something that existed in a different category entirely. Something that didn't fit the profile that had been building for 7 days, and the misfit was so complete that it demanded explanation. She bent down, picked up a piece of equipment that had shifted during the incident, started checking it for damage. Routine post-incident protocol. Standard procedure. Nothing to discuss here. Nothing unusual. She was aware of Waring watching her from across the platform. She was aware very specifically of the quality of his attention. Not hostile. Not confused. Calculating. That was too fast, she thought. That was too precise. She kept checking the equipment. On the platform behind her, Briggs sat with his back against the railing. Not looking at anyone, looking at his own wrist, at the place where her hand had been, at the marks that a proper grip leaves on skin when it's been applied with genuine load-bearing force. He sat there for a long time. That evening, Harlan was in his office reviewing the week's evaluation materials when the knock came. He knew it was Briggs before he opened the door. He couldn't have said why. Something about the timing. Too late for a routine question. Too deliberate for an impulse, Master Chief. Harlan stepped back. Let him in. Briggs stood in the center of the small office and said it, all of it. The bridge, the grip, the 11 seconds. The specific speed of what she'd done, how she'd been moving, before anyone else had fully registered that the sound meant something, before the instructor had taken his first step, before Briggs himself had understood that he was falling. He said it carefully, the way someone says something they've been rehearsing, not because they want to sound good, but because they want to be accurate. When he finished, the office was quiet. Harlan looked at him. You're telling me this because it didn't match, Briggs said. Any of it. Everything we've been watching her do all week. It didn't match what I saw on that bridge. Harlan was quiet for a moment. Go eat dinner, son. Briggs opened his mouth. Thank you for telling me. Go eat dinner. Briggs left. Harlan sat down. Put both hands flat on the desk. Looked at the middle of the room. A locked file. A JSOC contact who'd said 11 words and ended the call. 12 minutes of precision on a closed range at 0400. And now a grip on a rope bridge that had just told him something that confirmed a thing he'd already suspected, but hadn't been able to name. He picked up the phone and called the same number he'd called Friday night. It rang 4 times, answered on the 5th. Buck. The voice was careful. Controlled. I'm not asking for details, Harlan said. I'm asking one thing. Is there someone above my pay grade who has a reason to care how this evaluation goes? Someone who's already been informed she's here? Silence. Long enough to mean something. I can't confirm names, the contact said. I'm not asking for names. Another silence. Shorter. I can't confirm. The contact said carefully that someone with the relevant authority and the relevant background has been monitoring the situation. I can't confirm that. Harlan closed his eyes. Thank you, he said. Don't call again, Buck. I won't. He put the phone down. Sat in the quiet of his office. Someone was already watching. Someone above his clearance level, with knowledge of whatever program had produced Claire Voss, had been receiving reports on her situation here, which meant this evaluation was not simply what it appeared to be on the paperwork, which meant there were layers he couldn't see and forces he couldn't identify, and a soldier in his program who was, in ways he still didn't fully understand, in the middle of something much larger than a training assessment. She was in his program. Whatever else she was. He was responsible for what happened to her while she was here. He opened the bottom drawer, looked at the dismissal recommendation, did not sign it, did not file it, closed the drawer. By Wednesday, Briggs had changed, not dramatically, not in ways that announced themselves, just the specific quality of his participation in Finch's commentary had shifted. He'd stopped laughing. Not loudly, not as a statement, just quietly. The way you stop doing something when you've lost the ability to make yourself do it anymore. His face, when Waring said something about Claire, went from the reflexive amusement of someone going along to a particular neutrality that was, in its own way, louder than agreement. Waring noticed. Of course Waring noticed. Noticing was his primary skill. Not combat, not leadership. The careful, continuous cataloging of social dynamics and the patient identification of leverage. He watched people the way a card player watches hands, not looking at what was shown but reading what was held back. At dinner Wednesday, he didn't address Briggs directly. He spoke near him. Which was more effective? Always one, he said to Tully, in Briggs's auditory vicinity. Every class. One who starts feeling responsible for the weak link. Tully, cheerfully. Natural instinct. Misplaced, Waring said. But natural. Finch looked up from his food, looked at Briggs with the specific attention of someone reassessing an assumption. The team is the unit, he said. His voice had gone quieter, more direct. The voice he used when he wasn't performing for an audience but actually meant something. Sentiment about individuals who can't perform is how units get people killed. Briggs looked at his tray, then looked up. She held me on that bridge, he said, quietly, but clearly silence. Finch, a reflex. Situational, Briggs. It wasn't a reflex. It was a decision. I could feel the difference. More silence. The kind that meant people were listening, even if they weren't going to say so. Waring's eyes moved to Claire's table across the room, stayed there for a moment, then moved back to his food. He let the conversation drift somewhere else. Easy, natural. The way he handled everything. No confrontation, no resistance. Just a smooth redirect that left no fingerprints. But he filed it. The bridge. The grip. Briggs's certainty about the quality of what he'd felt. The specific word he'd used. Decision. Waring thought about that word for the rest of dinner. And then, because he was who he was, intelligent and careful, and pointed in exactly the wrong direction, he decided to do something about it. He built the document Thursday night. Not quickly. Not carelessly. Waring did nothing carelessly. He used the correct form number. Behavioral Incident Report, DA Form 4856. The version updated 2 years ago that most people in the program were still confusing with its predecessor. He used the correct formatting, the correct field headers, the correct clinical language that sat on the precise line between documented observation and actionable accusation. He described a pattern. Not one incident, a pattern. Consistent disorientation under stress, difficulty maintaining situational awareness, behavior inconsistent with unit safety requirements. He used specific dates, specific exercises, specific documented failures that were all real, all in the record, all defensible as observations. He did not sign it with his own name. He signed it with the name of Instructor Sergeant Dale Kowalski. Kowalski was on leave. He was in San Diego visiting his daughter. He would not check his work email for 4 days. Waring knew this because Kowalski had mentioned it at Chow 2 weeks ago, and Waring had, as he always did, filed the information in case it became relevant. It had become relevant. He uploaded the document at 2300, watched the confirmation appear on screen, closed the terminal, went to bed. He slept well. He almost always slept well. It was one of his qualities. Harlan found it in his inbox at 0600 Thursday morning. He read it once, twice, a third time. Then he looked at the signature block. He knew Kowalski's formatting, had reviewed enough of his documentation over the years to know the specific phrases Kowalski used, the particular way he structured observations, the consistent habits of a writer who'd been producing military paperwork for 15 years and had his patterns locked in. The document used none of them. He picked up the phone, called the leave contact number Kowalski had filed before his departure. Kowalski answered on the second ring from a coffee shop in San Diego. His daughter's voice audible in the background, clearly in the middle of something domestic and uncomplicated. Sergeant Kowalski, have you filed any documentation in the last 48 hours on a trainee named Voss? Pause. No, Master Chief. I'm on leave. I haven't accessed the system since Tuesday. Thank you. Enjoy your leave. Harlan hung up, sat with the document in front of him. It was fabricated. That was now certain. Someone in this program had committed a federal offense to accelerate the administrative removal of a soldier whose real file didn't exist at his clearance level. And they'd done it carefully. And they'd done it using a real person's identity. And they'd timed it to a moment when the real person was 3 states away. The problem was evidence. He had a formatting inconsistency and a phone call confirming Kowalski was on leave. That was enough for him to know what had happened. It was not enough to prove it to a standard that would survive administrative scrutiny. Not yet. He put the document in his bottom drawer, next to the dismissal recommendation that he still hadn't signed. Then he went to find Claire. She was on the maintenance bench outside the armory, weapon fields stripped on the cleaning mat in front of her, each component laid out in precise sequence. She was running a bore brush through the barrel when he sat down beside her. He didn't preamble. How are you doing? Not a checkbox question. The real version. She ran the brush through the barrel again, checked the light through the chamber. Fine, Master Chief. That's not what I asked. Pause. Small. Deliberate. I know what you asked, she said. The desert wind moved through the yard. Somewhere on the far range, the pop of training rounds. The sound of the facility doing what it did. Continuous, indifferent, ongoing. The board is meeting tomorrow, he said. The paperwork they're considering. I know what they're considering. Do you want to contest it? She assembled the lower receiver, piece by piece, unhurried. each component in sequence. Contesting it isn't the right word, she said. He waited. He was good at waiting. 25 years had made him good at it. There's a process, she said. I'm inside the process. The process is doing what it's supposed to do. He looked at her profile, the straight line of her nose, the set of her jaw, the particular quality of a person's who's not suppressing emotion because they lacked it but because they'd learned had been made to learn. That, expressing it in certain environments, created complications that lasted longer than the feeling. Someone filed a behavioral incident report this morning, he said, signed with an instructor's name. That instructor is currently in San Diego. Her hands went still. 1 second. Absolute stillness. Then she kept assembling. That's a serious allegation, she said. Yes, do you have proof? Not enough. Yet. She assembled the upper receiver, snapped it to the lower. Function check, trigger, bolt, charging handle, automatic, smooth, the product of muscle memory that had no interest in pretending. Master Chief, yeah. Do you know what you're looking at? With me, he thought about how to answer. Thought about locked files and JSOC contacts and 12 minutes on a dark range and a grip on a rope bridge that Callum Briggs had described as a decision rather than a reflex. No, he said, honestly. Not entirely, but you're not writing me off. No. Why not? He considered that for a moment. The real answer. Not the procedural one, because in 25 years, he said, I've learned the difference between someone who can't do the job and someone who's choosing not to. I don't know why you're making that choice. But I know which one you are. She held that for a moment. Then she looked at him. Really looked. The first time she'd made direct eye contact with him in any context that wasn't required by protocol. The process will resolve, she said. One way or another. Claire, first name. Not rank. She waited. Whatever is happening here, he said. You're not as alone in it as you think. Something moved across her face. Brief. Almost nothing. The way a reflection moves across water when someone passes nearby. There, then not. She stood up. Collected her weapon, nodded once, walked back toward the barracks. Harlan sat on the maintenance bench for a long time after she'd gone. The Nevada morning going about its business around him. The facility noise. The indifferent sky. He thought, whoever is on the other end of that locked file, they need to know what's happening here. They need to know it's not just difficult. It's being made difficult. He went to his office, sat at his desk, looked at the phone. Then he looked at the email system. He typed a message to an address he'd been given years ago, in a different context, by a person whose name he'd been asked not to write down. 3 sentences, no names, no specifics, just the essential shape of what was happening. A situation developing in a direction that someone with the relevant authority might want to know about. He sent it, then sat back and waited for whatever came next. The forged document moved through the administrative system quietly and efficiently, the way well-constructed falsehoods often do. Arriving in the right inboxes, using the right language, triggering the right flags without triggering the wrong ones. By 1400 Thursday, it had generated a preliminary response from the evaluation board, a note confirming receipt, a notation that the report had been added to the VOS file, procedural flag recommending expedited review of the dismissal timeline. Someone had done the thing they set out to do. And it had worked, on paper, exactly as intended. What they hadn't accounted for was Harlan. What Harlan hadn't fully accounted for was the email he'd sent that morning, and where it was going to end up, and what the person who received it was going to do about it. But that was Thursday. And Thursday wasn't finished yet. The yard was quiet by 2100. Claire sat on her bunk in the dark, not lying down, sitting. Back against the wall, knees up. The posture of someone in the middle of a conversation they haven't started yet. The barracks had gone through its evening cycle. Chow, gear check. The gradual subsidence of noise that happened as tired people stopped pore-forming and started sleeping. By 2200 it was genuinely quiet. The good quiet. The kind that belonged to no one and therefore to everyone. She sat in it. And for the first time since she'd stepped off the transport van 9 days ago, she stopped calibrating. Not performing the failure, not monitoring the containment, not tracking the personnel in the room and the distance to the exit and the angles of approach. not running the background process that assessed, continuously, whether the protocol was holding, whether anything she'd done or said or shown had compromised the profile. Just sat in the quiet, in the dark. In room 208 at the back of a barracks, at a training facility in the Nevada desert, she thought about Jesse Marin, not the way she usually thought about him. Carefully, at a managed distance, with the particular emotional discipline of someone who understood that grief was a resource she couldn't afford to spend in the field. The other way, the way that happened at 2200 when the barracks was quiet, and there was nothing between her and it. He would have hated this week. That was the first thing she thought, and it surprised her not. The thought, but the way it arrived. Specific, almost fond. He would have absolutely hated this. Not the difficulty. Jesse had never minded difficulty. He'd minded smallness. He'd minded the particular kind of social cruelty that disguised itself as assessment. He'd had a very low tolerance for people who confused confidence with competence and then made other people pay for the confusion. They're not even doing it right, he would have said, about Finch. Like, if you're going to be the worst person in the room, at least be interesting about it. She almost smiled. Almost she looked at the window, the narrow rectangle of Nevada sky. Stars, the density of them visible only at this distance from anything that called itself a city. She found Cassiopeia, there, same place it always was. I know which one it is, I know you know. I just like saying it. 9 months. 9 months of carrying his voice around and not being able to tell anyone why she was carrying it, or what it cost, or what it felt like to attend a funeral in civilian clothes from the back of a chapel, because there was nothing she could have said that was both true and permitted. The question surfaced before she could stop it. Was this worth it? Not the years, not the work, not the mission. She had never once questioned the mission, and she wasn't starting now. But this specific thing. 9 days of deliberate smallness, 9 days of wallpaper and dead weight and shell shock, spoken by people who had no idea what shells actually were, or what it actually cost to survive the sound of them. Was this worth it? She sat with the question, did not flinch away from it, did not replace it with something more manageable, because the psych officer had said sustained pressure, and she had nodded and understood the clinical meaning, and what she had not understood. What she understood now, in her body, in the specific weight that had accumulated over 9 days, was that sustained pressure on a human being was not a technical condition. It was loneliness, that was what it was, underneath the protocol and the containment and the procedure. Just the loneliness of being in a room full of people who were confidently, completely wrong about what you were, and not being allowed to correct them, and having to watch the wrongness compound itself day after day, while the paperwork that said you didn't belong here grew heavier. She breathed in, let it out slowly, thought about Harlan on the maintenance bench, the specific quality of his silence. The way he'd said, "You're not as alone in it as you think," without making it into a speech, without requiring her to respond to it as anything other than information. She thought about Briggs at dinner 2 days ago, saying it was her in a voice that was quiet and factual and completely uninterested in whether Finch appreciated the correction. Small things, both of them. But small things were sometimes the things that held. She looked at Cassiopeia. 5 more days, she thought. And then, before she could catch it, or maybe not 5, she held that thought the same way she'd held it Friday night. Like something fragile, like water in cupped hands. Possible, but only if you didn't grip. Because wanting something she couldn't control had always been the most dangerous thing. More dangerous than the flashbang simulator. More dangerous than Waring's careful eyes and Finch's careful positioning and the forged document currently flagged in an inbox somewhere in the administrative chain. More dangerous than any of it. She lay down, did not close her eyes yet. Outside the window, the Nevada dark was complete and cold, and full of stars that had been there long before this facility existed, and would be there long after it was gone, which was either comforting or not, depending on what you needed it to be. She let it be comforting. Just for tonight, she needed one thing to be easy. And then, somewhere around 2300, in the particular way sleep comes when you've finally stopped fighting it, she stopped watching the stars and slept. At 4:30 Friday morning, a dark SUV left Naval Amphibious Base Coronado. No markings. Government plates. One occupant. Nora Vance had read the email at midnight, had sat with it for an hour, had made one phone call, brief and specific, to confirm what she already suspected. Then she'd gone to pack a jacket, because there were some things you didn't do by phone, and some people you didn't leave waiting longer than necessary. She drove northwest into the desert dark. The road empty at that hour. The sky doing what Nevada skies did before dawn, going that particular shade of nothing that was just barely distinguishable from the ground. She had about 4 hours. She used them to think about what she was going to say, what she was going to tell the truth about, and what the truth was going to cost the both of them, and whether it was worth it. She already knew the answer to that last one. Had known it since midnight, since the moment she'd read 3 sentences in a plain email from a man she'd never met who was doing his best to take care of someone he barely understood. Worth it. Obviously worth it. Some things were obvious. The desert went on in the dark ahead of her, flat and enormous and honest, and she drove into it at highway speed. And Fort Deseret was 4 hours away, and Claire Voss had been alone in this for 9 days. And that was already too long. 4 more hours. Then they could start fixing it. The SUV arrived at 0847. Claire saw it from the practice range. She'd been out since 0530, dry firing in the early cold. The same routine she'd maintained since day one. Practice that kept her hands calibrated and gave the part of her that knew what it was doing somewhere honest to exist for an hour before the day required it to disappear again. The range was empty at that hour. Just her and the targets and the particular Nevada quiet that existed before the facility fully woke up and filled itself with noise and assessment and the continuous performance of being evaluated. She was walking back toward the main yard when the vehicle came through the main gate. Dark. No visible markings. Government plates. Moving with the unhurried certainty of something that belonged here and didn't need to announce it. She stopped walking. Not dramatically. Her feet just stopped. The way the body sometimes acts before the mind has finished its sentence, flagging something as significant before the conscious processing has caught up. She looked at the vehicle for 3 seconds. Then she looked at the ground in front of her. Then she picked up her kit and walked inside, because wanting something before she knew what it was had always been how she got into trouble. And she had 5 days left, and she was not going to spend them hoping for a specific outcome and then recalibrating when the outcome turned out to be something else. She had learned, had been made to learn, in rooms and situations that didn't permit the luxury of misplaced expectation, that the distance between what you hoped for and what arrived was where most damage happened. So she didn't hope. She walked inside. She put her kit away, and she waited to see what the morning brought. Harlan found her at 0855, on the maintenance bench outside the armory. He didn't sit down this time. He stood, hands in his jacket pockets, and looked at her with the expression of a man who had slept 4 hours and made a significant decision before sunrise. Supply annex, he said. East end of the yard. 5 minutes. That was all. He walked away. Claire looked at the space where he'd been standing. Then she looked at her hands. Then she stood up, collected her rifle, and walked toward the east end of the yard. The supply annex smelled like motor oil and old canvas, and the particular mustiness of military equipment that was functional and maintained but never exactly new. Metal shelving to the ceiling, crates stacked in the organized chaos of a space that served a purpose, without caring about aesthetics. The kind of room that existed everywhere on military facilities, and was paid attention to by no one. Commander Nora Vance was standing in the center of it, 54 years old. Silver hair cut close and practical. Medium height, civilian jacket over clothes that were unremarkable in the specific way of someone who had stopped needing her appearance to communicate her authority, because her authority had long since stopped requiring communication. She stood the way certain people stand, with the settled weight of someone who had been in enough serious rooms to have stopped bracing for them. Claire stepped through the door and stopped. 3 seconds of absolute stillness. Because here is the thing about encountering someone who actually knows. Not someone who has read a report. Not someone who has been briefed. Not someone who understands in the abstract what the work involved. Someone who has been in the architecture of it, who has read the actual files, who understands not just the outcome of a mission, but the specific texture of what it costs to complete it, and come home from it, and then keep going. You recognize them the same way you recognize terrain you've moved through before, even in different light. Something in the posture, something in the eyes. The quality of a person who has been carrying classified weight long enough that it has changed the way they hold themselves. Staff Sergeant Voss, Vance said. Commander Vance. The room was quiet, not empty quiet, full quiet, the kind that had something in it. Vance looked at her, not with assessment. She was past assessing. She was looking the way you look at something you've been concerned about for a long time, and are now seeing with your own eyes, and the seeing is both a relief and a reckoning. How are you doing, she said. Not a protocol question. Not the version Claire had been answering for 9 days with the word fine deployed as deflection. The real version. The version that acknowledged there might be a real answer. Claire stood in the doorway of the supply annex in the morning light and said nothing for 3 full seconds, which was, for her, an answer in itself. 13 days, she said. I've been running containment for 13 days. Vance nodded. I know. The board has the dismissal paperwork. I know that too. The behavioral incident report that was filed, forged, no hesitation. We confirmed it at 0200. The individual responsible is being removed from the program. The administrative process started this morning before I left Coronado. Claire absorbed that. He's intelligent, she said. Not defending. Just accurate. Giving credit where it was due in the specific way of someone who respected capability, even when it was pointed in the wrong direction. Not intelligent enough for this, Vance said. Not for what's actually in play here. Silence again. The supply annex doing its quiet thing around them. And then Vance did what no protocol had designed, what no psych officer's checklist had included, what no reintegration framework had anticipated as the mechanism that would actually matter. She told the truth. Jesse Marin's family received a formal commendation last month. She said the air in the room changed, not dramatically, just. The quality of Claire's attention shifted the way a frequency shifts when you find the right channel. Everything else dropped away. From the office of the Secretary of Defense, Vance continued. Her voice stayed level. Not soft, not careful, level. The register of someone delivering information to a person who needed information, not consolation. Closed ceremony. The commendation itself is classified. They won't be able to discuss the specifics publicly, and they understand why. But they have the words on paper, official words. They know his death was part of something that mattered. They know what he helped bring back made a difference. A pause. They know he didn't die for nothing. The supply annex was very quiet. Claire looked at the middle distance, at nothing visible, at something that existed in a room that wasn't this one, in a time that wasn't now, in a place that didn't have a name on any map. I know which one Cassiopeia is, Jesse. I know you know. I just like saying it. She breathed in. Slow. Complete. The breath of someone taking in something they hadn't known they needed until it arrived. You could have told me that, she said 9 months ago. Before any of this, yes, Vance said. I could have. I should have. No qualification, no defense. I'm telling you now. Silence. Then Vance said the last thing. The thing that wasn't in any protocol, wasn't a code, wasn't a command or an activation, or anything the program had designed or anticipated, just the truth. Spoken plainly from one person to another. You have been carrying this alone for long enough, Claire. Her name, not rank. All of it. Jesse, the mission, the injury, these 13 days. You have been carrying it alone and in silence for long enough. A pause, one beat. You have permission to put it down, just for the next hour. Long enough to show them what you are. Claire looked at her. And something in the supply annex shifted, not dramatically. Not the way things shift in stories designed to be felt rather than experienced. No music, no convenient light, no wind through a door that was already closed. Just a quality changed, in the room, in the way Claire was standing, millimeters maybe. The difference between a door locked from the inside and a door unlocked from the inside. Still closed, but the mechanism released. The evaluation is at 1400, Claire said. I'll be on the range. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. Vance held her gaze. Steady. I want to. Claire looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded. Once. The slow, complete nod of someone who has received something real and is acknowledging it as real. She picked up her kit, moved toward the door. Stopped. Commander. Yes, thank you. For driving 4 hours to say that in person, Vance said. There are some things you don't do by phone. The 1400 formation assembled in the staging area under a Nevada sky that had committed, finally and completely, to being October. Cold at the edges. The particular desert cold that arrived without warning and meant it. Gear checked, weapons loaded. The specific tension of people who understood that this evaluation meant something. For some of them, everything. And were performing their readiness as much as inhabiting it. The scenario. Urban hostage rescue. 3 buildings. Mixed role players. Some hostile, some civilian. 30-minute time limit. Point deductions for casualties, civilian contact, and team failures. The same architecture of assessment that had been producing documented failures from Claire Voss for 13 days. Harlan stood at the instructor's platform, clipboard in hand. Face neutral in the way of someone holding a great deal still. Vance stood just inside the perimeter fence, civilian jacket. Hands in her pockets. Nothing in her posture that's announced anything at all. She could have been anyone, an observer, a liaison, someone passing through. Except she was watching the formation with the specific attention of a person who had driven 4 hours before dawn for exactly this moment, and was not going to miss any of it. Finch read the roster, looked at Claire in the formation. The same expression he'd been perfecting for 13 days. A kind of preemptive disappointment, publicly displayed, designed to establish narrative before the evidence arrived. Outstanding, he said, his performance voice. The one calibrated for audience. Last chance for a turnaround. Let's see if miracles are real. Waring said nothing. He'd been quieter since morning. Something had changed in his bearing. A quality of awareness, a certain careful stillness that was different from his usual calculated observation. Like someone who had received information they hadn't prepared for and were still deciding what it meant for their position. Tully cracked his knuckles, cheerful and oblivious, which was, in its own way, the most honest thing about him. Briggs took his position in the formation. Without being told, without discussion, he placed himself at Claire's 6. Not dramatically, just that was where he stood. She noticed, filed it, said nothing. The squad moved out, building 1 standard approach. Finch on point, Tully at 2. Claire at 3, Briggs at 4, Waring at 5. She moved to the first threshold, and she was still slow, still deliberate. Still performing the hesitation at exactly the depth that had defined 13 days of documented failure, because the door wasn't open yet, because Vance had said just for the next hour, and the hour had not yet started. The hour started when she decided it started, and she was not going to waste it on building 1. Finch, boss, move. She moved. First room, cleared wrong. Muzzle angle off on the second sweep. A role player marked a hit on Tully. Paintball round. Left shoulder, bright orange against his jacket. Tully called it out with the resigned professionalism of someone following protocol. Outstanding, Finch said into the calm. The voice of a man who had been building toward a conclusion for 13 days and was watching it confirm itself in real time. Absolutely outstanding start. Right on schedule. Second room. She hesitated at the threshold. Longer than the first. Long enough that Finch's patience, always a performance, never particularly deep, made an audible sound that wasn't quite a word, Waring quietly to nobody specific. Some things don't change. They cleared the building. 2 simulated casualties. Score already in deficit. In the brief movement between buildings 1 and 2, Finch pulled alongside her. You have about 20 minutes, he said. Low enough for just her. That's all I'm saying. She looked at him. I heard you, she said. Building 2 was tighter. 4 rooms configured in an L shape, the second arm of the L, requiring a complete reorientation mid-building. The kind of layout that exposed decision-making, because you couldn't rely on momentum. Every turn required a fresh assessment, A conscious choice about angle and timing and priority. She ran it the same way. Deliberate, controlled, present but not released. And she was fighting something. Fighting herself. That was different from the previous 16 days. And anyone paying close enough attention would have seen it. The particular quality of restraint that looks like struggle. Because it is struggle. Because the thing being restrained is not a weakness but a capacity. And holding capacity back against its own grain requires exactly the kind of effort that leaves marks. Briggs at her 4, moving to her signals, not questioning them. Waring at 5, watching. The building cleared with 1 additional simulated casualty. 3 total. The score was a deficit that a performance record would normally find very difficult to recover from. From the perimeter fence, Vance watched and waited. The movement between buildings 2 and 3 took 40 seconds. 40 seconds of open ground between the second structure and the third, crossing the simulated street of the urban assault course, the kind of transition that existed in training to replicate the specific exposure of moving between covered positions in a real environment. Claire crossed it, and something settled. Not dramatically. No internal announcement, just something that had been held at a certain tension for 13 days released to a different level, like a frequency finding its correct pitch after a long time at the wrong one. She thought about Jesse. Not the way she'd been thinking about him. At the managed distance of someone carrying something carefully. She thought about him the way you think about a person when you're about to do something they would have recognized, something they would have understood, something that would have made them nod once. Sat, the way he nodded when a thing made sense to him. That particular nod that meant, yes, exactly. That's the right move, she thought. This is for you, too. Then she thought, no, this is just the job. You would have said to stop being dramatic and do the job. She almost smiled. Stacked outside Building 3. The door in front of her, the last building. The one with the reputation, among the training cadre, quietly documented, for being the scenario that separated everyone else from the category of people who could actually think clearly under simultaneous physical and cognitive pressure. The hostage room. Multiple hostiles. Geometry designed to make a clean resolution difficult enough to be meaningful. Finch took his position on the stack, looked at her. Something in his expression, not mockery this time, something more complicated. Like someone who has been very certain of a conclusion for a long time and is beginning, at the edges, to feel the first tremor of doubt. Not enough to change anything. Just enough to register. Last building, he said. His performance voice, but quieter. Whatever you've got. She didn't respond. The go signal came, and she went through the door. No hesitation at the threshold. Not a dramatic entry. Not aggressive. Not theatrical. Just immediate. The threshold was a problem with a correct solution, and she had the correct solution, and she used it and moved. First room. 2 role players. Angles read from the gap before entry. Shadow pattern on the floor. Weight distribution visible at the bottom of the door frame. The particular stillness of people waiting in a specific position. She went strong side. Correct. Both threats engaged before the room could respond. The controlled economy of someone who understood that accuracy and speed were not competing values when the fundamentals were solid enough. The room was clear before anyone else on the stack had crossed the threshold. What? Tully started. She was already moving. And here is the thing about years of operating in places that didn't exist on maps, with people who were very serious about what they were doing, in situations where the margin between getting it right and not getting it right was not measured in points on a clipboard. You stop performing movement. You stop executing techniques. You just move. The way water moves. The way a thing moves when it understands its own nature completely and stops negotiating with it. She flowed through the building. That is the only word for it. Not fast in the showy way, in the efficient way. The way that looks almost slow from the outside until you check the clock and realize how much has been accomplished. Her rifle transferred from strong to weak shoulder at the second corner. Smooth, automatic, not a technique being deployed, but a body doing what it had learned to do until the learning was indistinguishable from instinct. Third room. Civilian in the corner. She read the room in the half-second before full entry, identified the civilian by posture and position, and the particular quality of someone trying to be invisible rather than someone waiting to be a threat. Verbal command. Clear. The civilian moved to the designated safe position before the echo of the command had finished. Threat in the adjacent doorway engaged. Single shot. Assessment confirmed. Finch was behind her, running. Not leading, running, keeping up. There was a specific quality to the way he was moving now that was different from the previous buildings, from the previous 13 days. He was not directing. He was following, and he knew it. The knowledge was visible in the set of his jaw, in the way he took corners on her signal rather than his own read. In the fact that he had stopped talking entirely, because there was nothing he could have said that would have been faster than what was happening. Tully at his shoulder. Also running, Briggs at 4, moving fluidly, responsive to every signal, wearing at 5, silent, watching her with an expression that had stopped being calculating and become something else, something closer to the recognition of a person who has been very wrong about a very important thing and is experiencing the exact moment of understanding that. Fourth room. She paused for exactly 1 beat outside the final door. Not hesitation. Assessment. There was a difference, and every instructor on this course now understood it completely, in a way they had not understood it 4 minutes ago. She read the room through the door gap. 3 hostile positions. 1 hostage. The geometry was specific. The hostiles positioned to create overlapping fields of fire that made a standard entry dangerous to both team and hostage. The solution was not standard. It was the solution you arrived at when you'd been in enough rooms to understand that geometry was always solvable if you were willing to commit to the correct angle before you had full information. She committed. Went in left side, deep, immediate. First hostile engaged from the unexpected angle, the angle that opened the room instead of entering it from the center. Second hostile redirected by the entry geometry, out of position, a second behind. Engaged. Third hostile. The one covering the hostage had a half-second of window before Claire was between them and the window closed. She was already there. Hostage secured. Room cleared. The buzzer sounded. Not the red one, the other one. The clean single tone that meant mission accomplished. That meant the scenario had reached its intended conclusion. That meant everything the course was designed to assess had been assessed, and the answer was yes. The timer on the range board read 9 minutes, 44 seconds, the previous course record, 14 minutes, 11 seconds. An instructor looked at his stopwatch, looked at the board, looked at his stopwatch again, made a sound that was not a word. In the staging area, nobody spoke. Claire stood at the extraction point with her weapon already on safe, checked her gear, automatic, methodical. The same sequence she'd used to clean her rifle on the maintenance bench, to field strip her weapon after every failed exercise, to do the small correct things in a context full of things she wasn't allowed to do correctly. She didn't look at the timer. She didn't need to. The main training room at 1600. Industrial light, folding chairs. The smell of dry erase marker and institutional coffee and the particular density of a room where significant things had happened and the air still held them. Harlan ran the debrief methodically, professionally. Every building, every room, every decision point. He went through it the way someone goes through a thing they respect, with full attention, without rushing. When he reached Building 3, he read the time from the board. 9 minutes, 44 seconds. He let that sit in the room for a moment. Didn't editorialize. Didn't frame it. Just let the number exist. New course record. Previous record stood for 14 months. He looked at the class. This is what the standard looks like, he said. Not a comparison. Not a judgment on anyone else's performance. Just, this is what the standard looks like. You can each decide what to do with that information. The room was quiet. Finch looked at the table in front of him. His jaw was set. Something was working behind his eyes. Not shame exactly. Something more complicated. The interior process of a person dismantling a significant assumption and not yet knowing what to build in its place. Tully looked at the wall, looked at his hands. For once, he was the one looking at his hands. Briggs looked at Claire. She didn't look back. But the periphery of her attention registered him, and registered what his expression held, and filed it in the category of things that mattered. After the general class was dismissed, Harlan asked 3 people to stay. He closed the door, the 3 of them in the empty training room. Harlan, Vance, Claire, still in gear, rifles safed on the table. The residue of an afternoon that had rewritten something significant still present in the room with them. Harlan said, "Tell me what I'm looking at." Vance looked at Claire. The unspoken question, Claire said. "Tell him." So Vance told him. Not everything. Not locations, not targets, not the operational specifics that required clearances this room didn't have, but the shape of it, the architecture, a program, developed in the years after the wars began. Small teams, deep insertion, high-value work in environments where conventional forces couldn't operate without exposing the operation. Psychological conditioning designed to allow operatives to appear unremarkable in standard environments, to suppress reflexes, contain training, present as ordinary, until the protocol was released, a safety mechanism, an identity mechanism, a survival mechanism for people operating in places where being identifiable as what they were would end the mission, and likely end them. Claire had been in the program for 3 years. Active operations in locations that remained classified. A mission record that Vance described simply as clean, 0 friendly casualties, objectives achieved, extraction completed, and then a mission that had cost Jesse Marin his life, an IED in a location too confined for distance to matter. Claire brought home with physical injuries that had healed, and psychological damage that was more complex to assess, because the damage was not dysfunction, but the specific weight of survival when someone beside you hadn't survived. The program needed to know if she was still operational, still capable, still, in the technical language of the program, intact, which meant she needed to be assessed in a standard environment, under standard pressure, without the assessment apparatus knowing what it was assessing, which meant she needed to be here in this program, performing the containment for long enough that the evaluation was real. So the failures, Harlan said, slowly were contained, Vance said, by choice, by conditioning, by a protocol she maintained under conditions that were, she paused, more than the program anticipated. Harlan looked at Claire. How long did you know you were going to have to do this? Before you got here, 3 weeks. 3 weeks of knowing you were going to come here and fail on purpose. For 13 days. Yes, he absorbed that. Let it settle. The 4 a.m. sessions, he said. I needed to verify the equipment was still functional, she said. That the containment hadn't gone too far in the other direction. That it hadn't become real. Yes, he was quiet for a long moment, rearranging things. A person who had been watching something for 2 weeks and thought he understood the shape of it, and was now understanding that he'd been right about the shape, but completely wrong about the size. The bridge, he said. Briggs, that was just a person about to fall, she said. Simply, you couldn't contain that one. No. And something moved in her expression. Not quite a smile, but adjacent, the faintest warmth. I couldn't, he nodded, looked at Vance. The forged report, handled, Vance said. Waring will be processed out of the program. The document has been removed from her record and flagged for administrative review. A pause. He's intelligent. He saw something real on that bridge and tried to act on it before it changed things. He was right about what he saw. He made the wrong decision about what to do with it. The dismissal recommendation withdrawn. Effective as of, Vance checked her watch. Approximately 40 minutes ago. Harlan looked at the table for a moment, then looked at Claire directly. What happens now? Vance looked at Claire as well. The same question. Instructor posting, Claire said. SOTC. I requested it 6 months ago. Harlan raised an eyebrow. 6 months ago. Before this evaluation, the request was contingent on the assessment outcome, which is now clean, Vance said. Harlan looked at Claire for a long moment, thinking about 25 years. About the soldiers he'd watched come through programs like this one. About the ones who burned out, and the ones who broke, and the ones who, without announcement, became the people who made sure the next generation actually knew what they were doing. You'd be good at that, he said. She looked at him. Thank you, she said. For not filing the paperwork, he held her gaze. Thank you for giving me a reason not to. The yard quieted slowly after the debrief, the particular way training facilities quiet at end of day. Not all at once, but in layers, noise retreating from the ranges first, then the staging areas, then the equipment sheds, until what was left was the ambient sound of a place settling into itself for the night. Claire was on the maintenance bench when Briggs found her. Same bench where Harlan had sat beside her 2 days ago. The wood worn smooth from years of people sitting on it, with things to think about. She wasn't cleaning anything, just sitting with her hands in her lap and the October evening doing its early dark thing around her. Briggs stopped a few feet away. He had the look of someone who had been rehearsing something and had arrived at the moment where the rehearsal either held or it didn't. I should have said something, he said. Earlier in the week, when I could see it wasn't right. What they were saying, he stopped. What I was letting them say, she looked at him. You said something at dinner, she said. Wednesday. You said it was me. On the bridge, he nodded. That was, yeah. That's the one time that mattered, she said, simply. He was quiet for a moment, processing that. I didn't know what you were. He said, I knew something was wrong about the whole thing. The picture didn't fit, but I didn't know. Nobody's supposed to know, she said. That's the point. He nodded slowly. The nod of someone accepting something they don't fully understand but have decided to take on faith, which was its own kind of maturity. Are you okay? He asked. She considered the question, really considered it, which was different from the automatic processing she'd been doing with that question for 13 days. Getting there, she said. He nodded. Okay, he said, just that. He didn't reach for more. Didn't try to expand it into something that required a different kind of response. He just said okay as a complete sentence, as an acknowledgement of what she'd said, and an indication that he'd received it. And then he put his hands in his pockets and walked back toward the barracks. She watched him go. Thought, there were worse people in the world than Talon Briggs. Thought, it was possible that in 10 years he'd be someone's Harlan. Quiet, watching, not filing the paperwork when something didn't fit. She hoped someone gave him the chance. Finch found her at the fence line. She'd moved from the bench to the edge of the training yard, where the perimeter fence met the open desert, the place where the facility ended, and Nevada just continued, flat and enormous and indifferent in the way of things that had been here before and would be here after. She heard him coming. She knew his footsteps by now. 14 days in the same compound. You learned the sound of people whether you wanted to or not. He stopped beside her. Didn't speak immediately. They stood looking at the same distance. The desert, doing its early evening thing, cooling fast, the light going sideways and orange. The specific quality of an October Nevada sunset that was either beautiful or unbearable, depending on what you were carrying when you looked at it. I don't have the right words, he said finally. His voice was different. Not Finch voice, not the calibrated audience-ready version he'd been deploying for 2 weeks. Just his voice, quieter, less certain of its own effect. She didn't respond. I've been trying to work out what to say since the debrief. He paused. There probably is something I'm supposed to say. I don't have it. You don't need to have it, she said. I spent 2 weeks. I know what you spent 2 weeks doing, silence. The wind moving between them. Did it actually get to you? He asked. What I said. What we said. She thought about the bench, the dark of room 208, her hands in her lap and the question she'd sat with that she hadn't had an answer for. Was this worth it? The weight of wallpaper said out loud, said casually, said in front of people who wrote things on clipboards, some of it, she said. He absorbed that. He deserved to absorb it without her softening it. I'm sorry, he said. Not Finch voice. Not performed. 2 words that he was saying because they were the accurate words for what he was trying to express. He'd decided that accuracy mattered more than how it made him look. I know, she said. They stood for another moment, the desert going darker at its edges. Instructor posting, he said. I heard. SOC. Yes, you'll be good at it. She glanced at him. I'm acknowledging it, he said. Something almost dry in his voice. Something that might, in a different context, have been the beginning of self-awareness. I'm capable of acknowledging when I'm wrong. It's one of my better qualities. It might be your best one, she said. Right now. He made a sound, not quite a laugh. But in the vicinity, is that something? He asked. Being able to say it, she thought about that. About what enough meant. About the fact that she hadn't come here to be vindicated. She'd come here to be assessed. And the assessment was done. What Garrett Finch did with the next version of himself was a story she wouldn't be present for and didn't need to direct. It's a start, she said. He nodded. Put his hands in his jacket pockets. Walked back across the training yard. She watched him go. Thought. There were worse things to be than a person who'd be wrong for 2 weeks and then say so. Thought. It only took him 13 days, which was faster than some people managed in a lifetime. Thought. He might be okay. Might be better than okay, if something continued to interrupt the easy certainty he'd been living in. She hoped something continued to interrupt it. Vance found her last, at the rifle range. Closed now. Dark. The same range where she'd run drills at 0400, while Harlan watched from the shadow of the equipment shed and said nothing, and everything had shifted because of it. She wasn't holding her weapon, just standing at the firing line, looking at the distance, the way you look at something when you're not looking at it specifically, but you need somewhere for your eyes to rest, while the rest of you processes. Vance came and stood beside her. Neither of them spoke immediately. The desert night arriving around them. The specific Nevada cold that meant business. The stars beginning to appear in the east, the sky darkening from the horizon up. The first ones always in the same places. How do you feel? Vance said. Not how are you doing? How do you feel? Claire thought about that. Thought about 9 minutes and 44 seconds. About a buzzer making the right sound for the first time in 13 days. About the specific physical experience of stopping the containment, of just being what she was, fully, without the continuous labor of being something smaller. Like I've been holding my breath for a long time, she said. And I finally let it out. Vance nodded. The posting is confirmed. You can report to SOTC at the end of next week. They're expecting you. Thank you. The commendation for Jesse, the family's version. It's permanent record. Classified, but permanent. It doesn't disappear, I know. A pause. It helps. Good. Vance looked at the dark range. That's what it was meant to do. Silence again. The comfortable kind. The kind that exists between people who have covered the necessary ground and are resting in the fact of having covered it. You could have shown them on day one, Vance said, what you were capable of. You could have walked in here on day one and done what you did today. Yes, Claire said, but you didn't know. Why not? Even accounting for the protocol, the bridge, the 4 a.m. sessions, you let things show. Pieces of it. Claire was quiet for a moment, thinking about how to say the true thing. Because the protocol is about capability, she said slowly. And capability isn't the only thing that matters. She looked at the dark range, the target silhouettes just visible. How you get through hard things. What you do when it costs you. Who you are when nobody's looking and nothing is required of you except surviving until the situation changes. A pause. That's worth knowing. About yourself. Vance looked at her. And now you know. And now I know. What are you made of? Claire looked at her hands. The same hands she'd looked at on day one on the edge of her mattress, confirming they were steady. The same hands that had held Briggs on a bridge, and held a rifle clean, and held everything inside for 13 days, while the people around her made confident assessments about what she lacked. Same things I was before Jesse died, she said. I just needed to check after. I needed to know the weight hadn't changed what I was, had it? No, she said, it hadn't. Vance put her hand briefly on Claire's shoulder. Not consolation, not comfort exactly. Something more specific. The contact of one person confirming to another that they are seen, that the weight is acknowledged, that the 13 days were real and the cost was real, and so was the person who had paid it. Then she took her hand away. Get some sleep, she said. You've got a new assignment. She walked back across the dark yard toward the parking lot. The SUV, the drive back to Coronado, civilian jacket, and the government plates, and the way certain people moved through the world. Without announcement, without ceremony, showing up where they needed to be, and then going back to where they came from. Claire watched until the taillights disappeared through the main gate. Then she looked up, found Cassiopeia, there, where it always was. The same stars Jesse had pointed to on 3 different nights, in 3 different places. Each time with the same uncomplicated pleasure of someone who hadn't decided yet that wonder needed to be ironic to be genuine. I know which one it is, I know you know. I just like saying it. She lowered her gaze, breathed in the cold Nevada air, let it out slowly. The breath of someone who has set something down that they'd been carrying a long time, and is feeling for the first time what their hands are like without it. Not empty. Different. Lighter in a way that would take some getting used to. She walked back toward the barracks the next morning. Claire made her bunk. Tight corners. Left side then right. Same sequence, same result. The routine that had started every day for 14 days and was starting this one. The last one. The morning after everything had changed, and the morning was still just a morning. She picked up her kit. Walked out of room 208, down the corridor, through the door. Into the training yard. The October morning was doing its early thing. Cold, committed. The dark not yet fully resolved into dawn. The sky at that specific shade between night and day that belonged to neither, and was better than both. The facility quiet. The day not yet assembled. She walked to the main classroom building. Plived the door open. Diddy. Chairs stacked on desks from the overnight cleaning. Dry erase board, blank and white. Podium at the front, solid and deliberate. The east-facing windows ready to receive the morning light when the sun finished arriving. She set her kit down by the door, walked to the front of the room, and stood there, not in the corner, not near an exit, not in the position of someone who needed to know where the door was before they could be comfortable. In the center, right in the middle of the room, on the line between the podium and the first row of stacked chairs, where the morning light was going to come through the east windows and land exactly here, on exactly this spot, when the sun decided to show up. She stood in the center of the room and felt the particular quality of standing somewhere without bracing for it, without cataloging exits, without tracking angles, without the background process that had been running, continuous and tireless, for years in places that required it, and then for 13 more days in a place that only seemed to. Just a person in a room at the front. In the center, Reedity. The morning light came through the windows slowly. Way desert light comes. Not sudden, not dramatic. Just gradually more present, more committed, more itself, until the room was filled with it, and the blank whiteboard caught it and held it, and the empty chairs were waiting. She stood in it, and for the first time in a very long time. Not the first time she'd been still. She was always still. The stillness was old and practiced and not the same thing. For the first time, the quiet felt like hers. Not the quiet of containment. Not the quiet of protocol or discipline, or the daily labor of being something smaller than what she was. The quiet of a person who had nothing left to prove, and knew it, and was standing in the center of a room, waiting for morning, ready to begin.